From shy to lucky, the hottest girl he likes moved in with him. If you dig my recaps, don't forget to subscribe and smash that notification bell. This is the story of a young badminton player who's in love with a basketball player. Rushing to meet her early in the morning, the boy runs into the gym where the girl is only to get hit square in the face by a basketball. Taiki Inomata seemed pretty shaken by the blow, so Chinatsu Kano quickly rushes over to check on him. To apologize for her mistake, she gives him some chocolate, which he accepts without hesitation. Both of them study at a well-known private school called Aime, famous for its strong sports tradition. After finishing middle school, Taiki dove straight into the high school badminton team. Practices always start in the morning, and he works hard to be the first one there, but Chinatsu always beats him to it. In the chilly morning air of the gym, she's always practicing her shots with intense focus. Taiki, watching in admiration, has a crush on her. Later, Aime's gym is packed with dozens of students practicing sports like dance, basketball, volleyball, and table tennis. Off in one corner, Taiki can't help but daydream about marrying the girl he loves, while his friend Kaio bluntly tells him it's not going to happen, but is curious about this talk of marriage. Taiki explains that if they were married, he'd get to see Chinatsu's face every morning when he wakes up, which would be amazing. Kaio points out that the guy can't even ask her out. Chinatsu is the star of the basketball team, talented and popular both inside and outside of school, with a bright future ahead of her. Meanwhile, Taiki doesn't stand out much in badminton and is far from popular. In other words, he's a nobody playing a racket sport that no one really cares about. Kaio makes a comparison. Chinatsu's like a team that always makes it to the finals, while Taiki's the one that never makes it past the group stage. On top of that, Taiki barely has a reason to talk to her aside from the fact that they both train in the same gym. Taiki thinks he might be able to strike up a conversation by mentioning his mom, who also played basketball at their school. Kaio reminds him that pretty much everyone at their school had parents who went there too, but as Taiki says, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Besides, motivation is always higher when you're up against a stronger opponent. Kaio hopes that at the very least Taiki can make it to the knockout rounds and get Chinatsu to remember his name, or better yet, get her number. Without warning, Hina Chono sneaks up behind Taiki and presses herself against him for no reason at all. Taiki asks if she's still in middle school, but she proudly announces that she's now in high school just like them. She's also proud of having grown 7 centimeters since middle school. Taiki points out that she's still under 4'11", so she responds by kicking him several times in the butt, reminding him that he's not even 5'7". After things calm down, Taiki would love to know what makes girls happy, so he asks Hina. She lights up at the mention of relationships and acts like she's the ultimate love expert. First off, she says he can't be a fool. He has to project confidence and calmness to his crush. Also, it would help if he looked like a total heartthrob like Mars Nguyen. Early the next day, Taiki regrets asking Hina about that, given her very particular taste. Speaking of taste, he spots Chinatsu sitting on the stairs by the gym entrance, which hasn't opened yet, reading something. In his mind, Taiki thinks it's now or never. This is his best chance to finally talk to the girl he likes. His heart races as he considers introducing himself formally, but he feels that might be too much. Maybe he could thank her for the chocolate, but he hasn't even eaten it yet, so he doesn't know if it's any good. Then he figures his best shot is asking her what she's reading. But when he notices it's a basketball playbook, he decides against it since he knows nothing about the subject. At that moment, Chinatsu sneezes and Taiki rushes to offer her his scarf along with hot tea gloves and even a hand warmer that heats up when you shake it. Chinatsu stares at him in surprise, and he realizes he might have gone a bit overboard. However, she seems relaxed and actually smiles, teasingly asking what else he has in that bag. Taiki fumbles through his bag trying to find anything, but she laughs again, explaining she was just joking. Relieved that he made her laugh, Taiki sneezes as well, prompting Chinatsu to wrap the scarf around his neck and tell him to keep warm. In that moment, Taiki feels like he's in one of those scenes where a wife fixes her husband's tie. That's when he notices that Chinatsu has cold hands. After fixing the scarf, she tells him not to catch a cold. Taiki asks how she knows his name, and she says it's for him to figure out. Just then, the gym's guard arrives to unlock the doors. Before heading inside, Chinatsu mentions that Taiki's mom is amazing, and he realizes his name was written on the scarf's tag. Later, during a break in badminton practice, a teammate asks Taiki to grab a wet cloth. As he heads to the bathroom to get it, all he can think about is how the girl he likes knows his name. His dumbstruck expression says that all this really means a lot to him. Using Kaio's analogy, Taiki feels like he's made it past the group stage. Now he just has to make it to the quarterfinals by asking for her number. As he leaves the locker room, he spots Chinatsu talking to the girls' basketball coach. Just then, Hina pops up out of nowhere as usual and scares him. Noticing Taiki's eyes on the school's most popular girl, Hina tells him to know his place. But Taiki insists he was just concerned that Chinatsu and the coach seemed to be having a serious conversation. By the way, Hina mentions she saw Chinatsu with a boy recently, which drives Taiki crazy. Of course, she was only kidding. After practice, the protagonist realizes he forgot his towel at the gym, so he heads back. When he arrives, he sees Chinatsu still training alone, even at that hour of the night. He comments on it, and she explains that she wasn't satisfied with her shooting. Taiki thinks she shouldn't overdo it with the training, which she agrees with, but she doesn't see any harm in playing just a little longer today. In that moment, Taiki realizes just how much Chinatsu loves basketball, and before he knows it, he's holding the ball she passed him challenged to a one-on-one. As expected, the kid gets absolutely crushed, leaving him flat on his back, sweating like a pig. After his defeat, he mentions how he used to play basketball with his mom, and Chinatsu shares that she also played with her mom before joining the team. Hearing this, Taiki becomes convinced that it's fate, showing how much they have in common. Chinatsu then asks if he's ever considered playing basketball, but he admits that he's never been good at team sports. He prefers the feeling of being alone on the badminton court with all the responsibility on his shoulders. When he's in that zone with adrenaline pumping through his veins, whether he wins or loses depends solely on him. Chinatsu praises his perspective on the sport, but Taiki feels a bit embarrassed, thinking she takes these things much more seriously than he does. By the way, he asks if Chinatsu has kept training even after classes ended a year and a half ago. He asks this because back then he had gone to the gym on a day with no practice. Since he lived nearby, he decided to drop by and pick up some things. That's when he saw Chinatsu Kano shooting a basketball into the hoop, tears in her eyes. They said she hadn't qualified for the national tournament, so she must have been devastated. But even then, she looked so determined, and that motivated him as well. Not only that, but it was also what made Taiki start to like Chinatsu, though he doesn't say this out loud. Hearing this, Chinatsu is visibly affected, but she drops the subject when the gym supervisor announces it's closing time. While putting away the ball cart, she accidentally drops one, and when she bends down to pick it up, Taiki moves at the same time. Their hands meet on the ball, and for a moment they're facing each other. Maybe it was the physical exercise, but Taiki thought Chinatsu's hand felt warmer this time. The next day, the badminton player heads to the kitchen to grab his lunch. His mom asks if he's not taking his sweatshirt today, but it's way too hot for something that thick. On a magazine lying on the table, Taiki notices a page with Chinatsu on it, so he picks it up and mentions her name to his mom. She comments that she and Chinatsu's mom used to play basketball together on the school team, and Taiki realizes this is the perfect excuse to talk to that girl. Unfortunately, his mom adds that Chinatsu will be moving to another country in March, leaving Taiki feeling like the ground's been ripped out from under him. Now, the conversation she had with the coach the other day starts to make sense, so he runs to the gym without even explaining. On his way, he's outraged to find out that Chinatsu Kano is giving up on everything despite being so talented and dedicated to basketball. Apparently, the disappointment she felt after failing to qualify for the national tournament shook her deeply, but he never imagined she'd just leave it all behind and start a new life in another country. When he finally arrives out of breath, Taiki takes a moment before asking Chinatsu to go to the national tournament. After all, he learned from her to work hard every day to achieve his goals and to not give up even after losing. So he begs her not to quit her career even if she moves abroad. After his emotional plea, Chinatsu reveals she's not moving, leaving Taiki feeling like a fool. Actually, it's her family that's moving. She's going to stay with someone else. Once again, Taiki feels embarrassed for getting worked up for no reason, so he says it's a relief to hear that and awkwardly turns to leave out of shame. But then Chinatsu admits she's feeling conflicted, catching his attention. She imagines she'll feel lonely without her family around, but then she remembered when she quit her middle school team and how badly she wanted to go to the national tournament and not give up. And all of this was because of Taiki Inomata. Taiki is confused by this because he doesn't think he ever said anything that's special. Then Chinatsu tosses him the ball and says the two of them could play together again sometime. At 9:30 the next morning, Taiki Taiki is freaking out in bed, convinced he said something incredibly embarrassing at the gym. At least it's Sunday, so he won't have to deal with his problems today. For the first time in his life, he doesn't want to see Chinatsu Kano, but it looks like his plans are ruined when she shows up in person in his kitchen. Moments later, Taiki's mom walks in and announces that Chinatsu is going to live with them. Later, after introducing herself to the Inomata family, Chinatsu gives a gift to the residents, and Taiki's grandfather comments that she's as beautiful as his wife was in her youth. A man asks if the house isn't more radiant with her presence, and Taiki couldn't agree more. After all, just seeing Chinatsu out of her school uniform was amazing enough, but now having her in his house every single day helping his mom in the kitchen and eating sushi was on a whole new level. From what he'd heard, this would last 2 years until she graduated. Just the other day, Taiki was thrilled because he'd passed the next level of Kaio's analogy, but having the girl he likes living in his house. That's like playing in the World Cup. Speaking of the devil, Chinatsu knocks on his door because his mom told her he could take a bath. Taiki notices that she's dressed in casual home clothes and had just come out of the bath, which only makes her more charming. Feeling embarrassed, the boy pretends to be engrossed in a magazine, focusing his eyes on it. Chinatsu comes closer and asks if it's this week's Jump issue. She's been busy this week and didn't have a chance to read it. Even more embarrassed by how close she is, Taiki backs away and offers her the magazine. As she takes it, she gives him a sweet, grateful look. Living in someone else's house is always tough, but it's much easier when you're with someone you see every day at practice and who lends you their Jump magazine. With that, she bids him goodnight and heads off to sleep. As Taiki goes to the bathroom, he wonders if Chinatsu really doesn't mind living with a guy. If she doesn't, then he must be the only one acting like a dog in heat, imagining her taking a bath in his tub. The next day, Taiki vents his feelings on the badminton court against Kaio. Seeing how unusually happy he is, Kaio gets it, but advises him not to let anyone know that Chinatsu is staying at his place. Taiki asks why, and Kaio simply tells him to look around. When he does, Taiki sees a bunch of boys zombified and head over heels for the newest resident of his house. Kaio reminds him that she's incredibly popular, and if her admirers find out what's happening, Taichi's life will become a living hell at this gym. At least Kaio knows his friend is lucky to be living with the girl he likes, and maybe, just maybe, the two of them will end up going out one day. Taiki mentions that she was planning to leave the country but decided to stay in Japan. Because of that strong resolve, he doesn't even have the guts to ask her out. Seeing this, he's determined to make it to the national tournament so he can feel worthy of being with her. Kaio points out that very few people make it to that kind of tournament in their first year, and judging by how Taiki is playing, he can forget it. Taiki agrees, but insists that nothing will stop him from trying. Speaking of motivation, he challenges Kaio to another match, but Kaio believes rest is important too. While Kaio is resting, Hina comments that Taiki has already started a match with someone else. Kaio explains that the kid has a goal to make it to the national tournament and won't stop until he reaches it. Hina laughs, but acknowledges that the boy is determined. Kaio adds that those who believe in themselves often become the strongest in everything. Back at home, Taiki continues his physical training. Despite being exhausted, he doesn't plan to stop for the day, frustrated with his performance on the court. This is evident as he watches footage of the earlier training session on his phone. Chinatsu arrives asking what he's watching, and the boy pretends it's nothing special, but soon admits that someone filmed him playing. Chinatsu wants to watch, but of course he refuses, thinking it's too embarrassing. The girl insists, saying she loves watching him train, so he gives in and hands her the phone. Inside, he's surprised to realize that she's been watching him train too. Contrary to what he thought, Chinatsu actually likes how Taiki moves on the court, reacting to the shuttlecock's speed. Taiki still feels he's too slow and needs to be quicker to make more precise shots, reading the game rather than just chasing after the shuttlecock. Otherwise, he won't make it to the national tournament. In this last part, he accidentally reveals his goal. He intended to share it only after making some progress, but since the cat was out of the bag, he admits that this is indeed his plan. Inside, he regrets always acting like a fool in front of this girl. Then Chinatsu goes to her room and returns with an ankle bracelet for him, something she made when she decided to stay in Japan. With this accessory, she thought her decision would feel more tangible. Taiki Teichai accepts the gift right away and ties it to his leg as tightly as he can. Chinatsu explains that this could cut off blood circulation and gently reties it. In the middle of this, she also asks him to make it to the national tournament. After securing the bracelet, she notes that now they're matching and wishes him good night. With that, Teichai vows to train so hard that the bracelet will break and fall off. If this keeps up, the boy is bound to fall head over heels for Chinatsu Kano, and because of that, he plans to do 30 sit-ups every time he feels a distracting emotion. As dawn breaks, Teichai is up early and ready for the break, so much so that even Chinatsu, dressed in casual home clothes, asks why. Teichai explains that he's a newbie and needs to help out, plus he wants to train too. With that, Chinatsu wishes him good luck, and as the badminton player heads out the door, he thinks it's almost like they're married before sprinting off to his destination. Upon arriving at the gym, the guy was 100% focused on his abs, trying to push away the dark thoughts invading his mind. Hina asked if something happened between him and the basketball senior. Although he didn't answer, the way Teichai snapped made Hina realize it had to be related. With that in her head, she kept pestering him to spill what was going on, but Teichai was worried she'd gossip to everyone about the fact that Chinatsu was living at his house. The last thing he wanted was all her admirers descending on him like vultures. As he reached the lockers, he ran right into Chinatsu herself, who handed him the wallet he had forgotten at home. Worried that Hina might catch on, Teichai ended up being a bit harsh when he took the wallet, and it seemed like Chinatsu didn't appreciate it, leaving with a frown. On the other hand, Hina couldn't have been happier to see her friend actually talking to a girl. During lunch, Kaio pointed out that Teichai was terrible at handling these things. He should have already told Chinatsu to keep living at his place a secret. If he suddenly started avoiding her to hide the truth, she might think he didn't want her living there. Worst case scenario, Chinatsu could end up thinking Teichai wasn't interested in her at all. Shortly after, a teacher asked for help carrying some chairs for next week's orientation. Teichai mentioned that they were freshmen, but the teacher ignored him and called Chinatsu and Hina over to help too. While everyone worked together, Teichai knew he needed to clear things up with his new housemate. He didn't want her to get the wrong idea. He even offered to help her with the chairs she was carrying, but when Chinatsu declined, Teichai became even more confused by her apparent anger. He started thinking maybe she had figured out the situation and was pretending not to know him, but it seemed worse than that. Observing the whole scene, Hina seemed to get the gist and gave her friend a thumbs up. Then she went over to Chinatsu and asked if she had a boyfriend. As Chinatsu said she didn't, Teichai could only wonder how he was going to strangle Hina for such a bold move. Hina pressed further, asking if Chinatsu wanted a boyfriend, suggesting that the two of them could walk home together and spend more time together. However, Chinatsu replied that her only focus was basketball, leaving Hina unsure how to react. Still, Teichai kind of expected that answer. Chinatsu had always been fully committed to the sport. After they finished moving the chairs, another teacher approached Teichai and praised the group for working even during their break. Teichai explained that it wasn't quite like that they were told to move the chairs during their time off. Putting that aside, the man informed Teichai that Coach Yuasa had complimented him, saying his strikes were getting stronger and that if he kept it up, he might compete at the high school level, maybe even make the team in time for the national qualifiers. Teichai turned to see Chinatsu's reaction, but she simply walked away, leaving him worried again. Hina asked Kaio what was going on between those two, commenting that it seemed like Chinatsu hated Teichai, but Kaio replied that surprisingly he thought those two made a great couple. Later, when practice started, Teichai was in top form and playing well in his matches, but the whole situation with Chinatsu was still weighing heavily on his mind. Speaking of her, he saw her fall on the court. Concerned, he went over to check if she was okay, only for Chinatsu to question if they weren't supposed to pretend they didn't know each other. Teichai explained that he was just afraid people would gossip and disrupt their training. Chinatsu thought it was because he liked Hina, as he had pretended not to know Chinatsu in front of her. With that in mind, she had decided to leave Teichai alone to avoid giving the wrong impression. She even offered to sleep in a shed out back or rent a cheap room. Teichai laughed, calling the idea ridiculous, just as Hina appeared in the distance watching the scene. After that, the badminton coach gathered those selected for next week's intramural championship qualifiers. Kaio commented to Teichai Taiki that the national tournament was still far off and the goal was to place in the top 16 at the qualifiers, then make it to the top 2 at the regionals. Taiki would have to defeat Haruyu, who had placed 3rd in the regional qualifiers. Around the gym, several students had come to watch Chainatsu play or to see Hina practice gymnastics. Both girls had all the support they needed, and a lot of confidence had been placed in them. Hina's father had been on the national gymnastics team, and it was as if she was born for the sport. Incidentally, noticing Taiki staring, Hina teased that if he wanted to watch he'd have to pay up, and that she understood why he was attracted to such beautiful things. Frustrated, Taiki turned away only to see Chainatsu watching him, which gave him the motivation he needed to get back to practice. On the way home, Hina wanted to accompany Taiki as she needed to see a chiropractor near his house. But Taiki was worried she'd see Chainatsu walking into his home, so he tried to hurry before Chainatsu left school. However, Hina kept getting distracted at every corner. She even wanted to stop for a taiyaki, but decided against it, fearing it would make her gain weight and hinder her movements or cause injuries. Taiki complimented her for how calmly she handled such things and thought she was really cool for competing at that level. Touched, Hina responded by teasing that he was getting all sentimental, causing Taiki to lose his patience and walk away. Hina caught up and admitted that he was even cooler for talking to Chainatsu, who was way out of his league. As Taichi's best friend, Hina assured him that she would always be rooting for him. Taiki then asked who was being sentimental now, but the conversation was cut short when Taiki spotted Chainatsu on the street, standing next to Haruyu. Hina immediately picks up on the expression Taiki makes and assures him that Chainatsu and Haruyu are definitely just friends. After all, she and Taiki have been spending time together and they're not dating either. With that said, they both convince themselves that this is the absolute truth and continue walking as if nothing happened. The problem is that the next day Chainatsu and Haruyu were together again, which to Kaio is normal since they're the school's star athletes. Hina points out that they're in the same class, sit next to each other, and were selected as class representatives. None of this helps Taiki calm down though, so Hina reminds him that Chainatsu said she only wanted to focus on basketball and wasn't thinking about starting a relationship. So far so good, but Taiki can't help falling for that basketball player. Later on, 2 badminton coaches are discussing their expectations for the team this year. The more experienced coach mentions that as always Haruyu is the most talented and can easily reach the national championship. However, another athlete has been standing out a lot lately, Taiki Inomata. At this point, Chainatsu drops a ball into the badminton court and apologizes, running over to retrieve it. The ball lands near Taiki, but all he can think about is the girl he likes spending all day talking to, Haruyu. He hands her the ball, but gives her a cold look and says goodbye rather curtly. Chainatsu in turn asks what time he's leaving school today because she forgot her house keys and his parents won't be home. In the middle of their conversation, Haruyu shows up calling Chainatsu Kai, a cute nickname which makes Taiki even more anxious, thinking these two are closer than ever. This sends Taiki into a jealous frenzy and he races home at night, his head spinning. Not only does Haruyu call her Chainatsu, but he adds the honorific senpai too. When he finally gets home, all he can think about is the kind of relationship and intimacy those two might share, feeling like they're a power couple way cooler and more amazing than him. And despite Chainatsu asking him to call her Kai, he never managed to do it. Speaking of Chainatsu, she shows up right after and completely startles him while he's lying on the floor as if the world had ended. Naturally, she asks what's wrong, but Taiki pretends nothing's going on. Chainatsu sits beside him and makes a casual comment about the badminton players at practice earlier, but all Taiki can hear is Haruyu, as if everything related to the sport revolves around that guy. Losing his mind, the boy says goodbye quickly, eager to escape the curse in his head, but Chainatsu pulls him back to ask something important, knowing he'll get flustered if she's wrong. She wants to know if Taiki ran home because he's sweaty. Since Chainatsu left school earlier to head home, she wonders if he hurried back so she wouldn't have to wait outside. Taiki is surprised at how she figured this out and feels bad that all he could focus on was what to call her her nickname Wise. Reflecting on it, he thinks he shouldn't worry so much about this. Anyway, he tells her he just ran home to stay in shape and heads out again to run some more, not giving much of an explanation. Outside, he realizes that having Chinatsu living in his house is really messing with his head and that he doesn't stand a chance against someone like Haruyu. But it doesn't matter who she's with or what people call her if Taiki starts worrying about every little thing, he's going to lose his mind. Right now, he needs to focus on his training to reach his athletic goals. Still, the truth is hearing Haruyu call her Kai bothers him a little. The next morning, Taiki gets back to training and starts a winning streak that impresses Kaio. On the other hand, Taiki notices that Haruyu, for instance, wins every match he plays. This reminds Kaio of the tension between Taiki and Chinatsu, so Taiki confesses that no matter what's happening between those two, he's not going to let it affect him anymore. To that, Kaio remarks that judging by appearances, Taiki's already failed at that mission. Despite making it clear he wouldn't care about that guy anymore, the moment Taiki sees Haruyu and Chinatsu together in the locker room, he turns around and pretends it doesn't bother him. He overhears their conversation while they're in a group. One of the boys mentions that Haruyu has won all the friendly matches, but Haruyu, not arrogant at all, points out that it's just for now. There will be more matches, and this is only the beginning. Chinatsu wishes him good luck and says goodbye, while Taiki freaks out outside the locker room, pretending not to care about the interaction between those two. Haruyu's friend comments on how he's been spending a lot of time with Chinatsu lately, to which Haruyu replies that they sit next to each other in class and that's all there is to it. However, he admits that there's something nice about seeing a girl working hard for what she wants. After the break, the players return to training and the match is now between Haruyu and Taiki. From the start, Haruyu controls the pace of the game and scores the first point. It's clear the two are on different levels, and no matter how hard Taiki tries, his opponent blocks every attack and responds with even more power. Kaio observes that it must be tough playing against someone who's close to the girl you like, especially if that guy might like her too. After the first set, Haruyu wins as expected. The other athletes start to think he's unbeatable. Kaio brings Taiki a bottle of water and Taiki asks if he wasn't much closer to winning this time, as if it had been a really balanced match. To this, Kaio suggests that maybe Taiki was too distracted by whatever's going on between Haruyu and Chinatsu. Taiki responds that he needs to thank Chinatsu for motivating him even more, and it's not like he's using her as an excuse for losing. After all, he doesn't play badminton because of her, he plays because he loves the sport. With that said, Taiki heads into the next set against Haruyu. Before starting, he glances at the ankle accessory Chinatsu gave him, and the match kicks off with a very different vibe from the first set. This time, Taiki seemed much more tuned in, focusing on each step and responding quickly, balancing the duel better. After the match, everyone had already left and Taiki and Kaio stayed behind to clean up the gym. Kaio mentions that it was a close one because while the first set was 21-7, the second ended 21-15. Even though he lost, this performance would surely help Taiki make the team. Still, Taiki was frustrated because the points he earned in the second set felt unorganized and Haruyu had controlled the pace throughout the entire match. Outside, Haruyu overheard the conversation and told his friend that actually he was the one feeling frustrated because of something that happened at the end of the game. On the way home, Taiki decided he needed to play more aggressively and read his opponent's moves better, as Haruyu was faster and stronger. Suddenly, Chinatsu appeared and called him over, saying she had rented 2 badminton rackets since they'd agreed to play together one day. As she set up the makeshift court lines, Taiki felt that having someone who understands how you feel by your side is something amazing. When the match began, Chinatsu was hopeless, with the racket struggling to even hit the shuttlecock. Taiki gave her a tip, and when she followed his advice, she was amazed by the result. Soon they started playing for real, and Chinatsu mentioned she had seen Taiki's match against Haruyu earlier, though Taiki would rather forget it. However, Chinatsu didn't think it was as embarrassing as Taiki did. After all, when Haruyu was 10 points away from winning, Taiki managed to score 11 points. Sure, the score was 11-4 at the time, but the important thing is that Taiki gave it everything he had at the end. Still, Taiki remained frustrated by the loss, and Chinatsu laughed, pointing out that he really hates losing. She always sees Taiki following instructions to the letter and practicing all morning until he perfects a move. Even during the match with Haruyu, he never gave up, which means he still has a lot of room to grow. Honestly, though, Taiki finds it hard to believe in himself since he feels he lacks natural talent, but he can believe in what Chinatsu says, and that might be enough. After they finished playing, Chinatsu received a message from Taiki's mother Yukiko asking when they would head home. At that moment, Taiki noticed a pendant on Chinatsu's backpack with a basketball and the name Kai, assuming Haruyu had given it to her. Seeing Taiki looking at the pendant, Chinatsu explained that it was a gift from her classmates, as everyone calls her Kai. Even though Taiki felt a bit more at ease after that, he asked Chinatsu to head home on her own. Even if it didn't bother her, he felt awkward walking home with another girl because people often looked at him strangely. As Chinatsu walked home alone, she reflected on the way Taiki thought about the situation. The next day, Taiki was caught off guard by the news that he would be playing doubles with Haruyu. And before long, Haruyu came over to ask him to train together. The first thing Haruyu asked his new partner was if Taiki liked Chinatsu. Taiki panicked and didn't answer, but Haruyu knew exactly what his reaction meant. Before long, the two of them had gone through every badminton drill imaginable at an insane pace, leaving Taiki exhausted. Haruyu teased him, saying he'd never seen Kai that tired and that whoever ends up with a girl like her will have to be just as tough. Hearing that, Taiki pushed past his fatigue and dove into the next drill. During class, the poor guy was slumped in his chair, completely wiped out from the intense training. Despite all the effort, Taiki felt he would always be inferior to Haruyu. Even after such intense exercise, Haruyu never slowed down and continued making precise shots. Later, during their doubles practice, Haruyu corrected Taiki for making a cross-court shot instead of a straight one, which would have added more speed in that situation. Without hesitation, Taiki started practicing the straight shot. After school, Haruyu pulled Taiki in front of the older students to lift him up. He pointed out all of Taiki's weaknesses, but assured them that he would improve a lot. Hearing this in front of everyone, Chinatsu felt happy, and Taiki appreciated being acknowledged by the upperclassmen. At that moment, Haruyu received a message from his girlfriend, and Taiki asked what that was about. Haruyu explained that she was a girl in show business, and he almost gave up on dating her, but when she finally asked him out, he accepted right away. He even thanked Kai for helping him pick out makeup for her, as he wouldn't have known what to buy without her help. That's when Taiki realized that Haruyu had been trolling him the whole time, making him furious. To top it off, Haruyu teased that it would be a while before Taiki started dating anyone. If you're enjoying this journey, don't forget to hit that like button. Your support helps motivate me to keep bringing you each episode. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update.